Okay, let's unpack this.
Welcome back to the deep dive. This is where we take, a whole mountain of information, the articles, the research, sometimes even internal memos, and we really just distill it all down.
Right, down to the essential, actionable insights that you need to get up to speed quickly and thoroughly.
And today we have something really special. We are getting a genuinely rare look behind the curtain of, some pretty high-stakes AI decision-making.
It's a fantastic source. We're not talking about a normal quarterly earnings forecast or some market trend analysis. We are diving deep into an internal, completely unfiltered performance report.
Specifically for SPECTRA AI's The Gambler's Ruin project.
Exactly.
So for you, the listener, this is just an incredible opportunity. We're not just, watching some highly sophisticated AI forecasting system make its predictions.
Yeah.
We have the full accountability audit, the breakdown of what happened when those predictions went wrong.
And specifically, across a set of really high-leverage football matches, we're talking English Premier League and Italian Serie A. Yeah, and the source material itself is just, it's brutally, I'd say refreshingly honest.
Oh, completely. It's titled Weekly Performance Analysis, The Gambler's Ruin Project, and it's focused on one specific model version, V-Pete-16, and its mission is stated right up front.
Which is what?
This is a full breakdown of failure, what it calls calibration debt, and then the prescribed improvements. It's a report that was clearly designed for surgical internal fixes, not for public relations.
Which is why the insights we can pull from it are so valuable.
Exactly.
So our mission today is pretty clear. We're going to try to understand how these professional systems are rigorously evaluated, what metrics actually matter at this level, and I think crucially, how they get fixed when they fail.
We're learning the mechanics of AI self-correction.
Yeah. And the report itself says it. In the opening memo, it says this past week was a calibration stress test, and that despite the misses, it provided extremely instructive data.
And that phrase, extremely instructive, that's so critical for anyone who deals with complex modeling.
How so?
Well, they weren't expecting perfection. They were deliberately stress testing the boundaries of what the system knows and, the limits of its current calibration.
So finding those limits even by failing was the whole point.
Precisely. Failure in this kind of high-level AI context, it wasn't a sign that the product is bad. It was a necessary, even planned step toward that long-term refinement.
So we're going to walk through how SPECTRA AI turns these systemic mistakes into precise, executable code upgrades.
Yeah. It's the difference between just saying, oh, the forecast was wrong, and really asking the deeper question, which is, why did the system believe it was right, and how do we measure the depth of that error?
That's the key. Okay, let's get into it. So if we start with the culture that's just outlined in this report, the first thing that really hits you is this necessity for full internal transparency. The intro just repeatedly emphasizes this is not a highlights reel. In the context of improving a system like V8.1C's, why is that kind of institutional honesty so foundational?
Well, because if you cherry-pick your successes, you fundamentally hide what they call systematic debt.
Systematic debt. I like that phrase.
It's perfect, isn't it? The goal of this performance audit isn't to look good. It's to find the underlying systematic flaws that are going to sink the model over the long run.
Right.
Imagine a forecasting system that's, say, 90% accurate. Sounds great.
Sounds amazing.
But what if it's only accurate because it's just predicting easy, 80-20 outcomes? The moment a really difficult, high-leverage match comes along, that 90% accuracy is suddenly worthless?
Because the underlying mechanism can't handle real uncertainty.
It can't. You've hidden the debt.
That's a powerful idea. It means they need metrics that penalize the quality of the prediction, not just whether it was right or wrong.
Precisely. And that's why the key performance indicators, the KPIs they use, go so far beyond simple wins and losses.
So what are they looking at?
They reference three main areas. There's directional accuracy, which is the simple one.
Win, lose, or draw.
Yep. Then there are internal diagnostics, things like XG expected goals and Monte Carlo simulations. And then, most critically, the Brier score analysis.
Okay, let's start with that one, the king metric here.
Yeah.
The Brier score. Why is this specific metric the thing that separates serious probabilistic forecasting from, simple betting tips?
Because directional accuracy, which is what most people focus on, did the model pick the winner, loser, or draw? That's binary, yes or no.
Right.
The Brier score, however, it doesn't just measure correctness. It's a measure of probabilistic resolution. and is a mathematical function that harshly penalizes the model for the confidence it attaches to a wrong prediction.
Okay, so let's make this really concrete for you, the listener.
Mm-hmm.
If I predict Team A has a 90% chance of winning and they lose,
Mm-hmm.
my Brier score is going to be exponentially worse than if I was more conservative and said they had, say, 55% chance and they still lost.
You've absolutely nailed it.
Even though the outcome was the same team, a loss. The Brier score is telling you I was way more wrong in that first scenario.
Yeah, that's it. The calculation takes the square of the difference between the probability you assign and the actual outcome. So if Team A loses, the outcome probability is 0. If you assign 90% or 0.9 to them winning, you were so far from the reality.
So it pushes the model to be ruthlessly honest about how uncertain it is.
100%. A lower Brier score is better. And a system that is directionally correct but wildly overconfident will get punished much, much harder than a system that's correct but is consistently, conservatively calibrated. It's the ultimate check against AI hubris.
That's a fascinating constraint. I mean, Spectra AI would rather have a consistently accurate 70% confidence call than, say, an occasionally perfect 95% call that's wrong 10% of the time.
It demands discipline. It essentially ensures that the system's internal confidence maps accurately to reality over the long run. If your Brier score is bad, it's telling you you're putting too much trust in signals that are, at the end of the day, spurious.
Okay, and then you mentioned the internal diagnostics XG and Monte Carlo. The report says these are basically the model checking its own homework. How do they fit in?
They check the mechanism of the prediction, not just the outcome. So expected goals, or XG, gives them a post-game measure of the scoring chances that were created.
Right.
But the Monte Carlo simulation is crucial pre-game. The model is running thousands, tens of thousands of simulated game outcomes based on all the current data team stats, player data, form.
So if the final prediction says Team A should win, but the Monte Carlo analysis shows that, 60% of the thousands of simulated realities ended in a draw or an opposing win,
then the system has a major internal inconsistency. It's a huge red flag.
So that Monte Carlo provides the internal consensus, and if the final prediction deviates from that consensus, especially with high confidence, that's a clear signal that one component of the V8.16 model is running rogue.
Precisely. It's a measure of consensus integrity. The model needs to be right, yes, but it needs to be right for the reasons that are confirmed by its deepest level of self-simulation.
Okay, so with that in mind, let's look at the weekly summary at a glance. Across the 5 matches they analyzed, what did those metrics tell the Spectra AI team about the overall health of V8.16?
Well, the raw numbers were directional accuracy of 60%, so 3 out of 5 correct outcomes.
Not disastrous, but not great.
Not great. But more concerning was the average Brier score of 0.65.
Now, 0.65 for 5 games is maybe average, but this is where it gets really interesting, right? The range analysis?
Yes. The best Brier was an excellent 0.49. The worst was a disastrous 0.78.
And a widespread.
It immediately suggests massive internal volatility. The 60% accuracy tells you that the model's core ability to calculate relative team strength was, fundamentally sound most of the time. But that gap between 0.49 and 0.78 is a flashing red light for calibration.
Okay, wait, I have to challenge this premise a bit. 60% accuracy isn't terrible, but in high-stakes forecasting, why is that acceptable if the calibration data is so high? Aren't they just, fixing an expensive coin flip?
That's a really important question. But they're not trying to be right 100% of the time. They're trying to consistently extract a marginal profitable edge.
Yeah.
The fact that the directional accuracy was 60% tells them the knowledge is mostly correct. The model knew 3 of those outcomes. The problem isn't that the core football insight is wrong.
The problem is?
The problem is that when the model was right, it often wasn't confident enough. And when it was wrong, it was catastrophically overconfident.
So the report confirms this. It concludes this was not a bad prediction week in terms of football insight.
No.
It was a crucial stress test revealing underlying systematic flaws in how it calibrates and weights things. It knew what to predict, but it failed to assign the correct level of conviction to that prediction.
Think of it like a surgeon who's brilliant at diagnosis but is a bit shaky with the scalpel. The system is fundamentally intelligent, but it's poorly disciplined in how it expresses that intelligence through probability.
And their job now is to impose that discipline.
And to do that, they had to dive into the 5 specific matches to see exactly how that volatility was showing up.
So now we're moving from the big picture metrics to the micro case studies. We're using these 5 specific matches to really categorize the types of AI learning experiences.
Exactly, where it hedges when it shouldn't, where it gets completely blindsided, and where its own internal components kind of betray the team.
These aren't just match results. They're 5 distinct, high-definition examples of how probability could be assigned incorrectly.
And each one demands a different surgical fix.
Okay, let's start with Case A, the near-perfect prediction. This was Juventus versus Roma.
Right. This was the success story, the high water mark for the week. Juventus won 2-1. The model correctly called a home win, and it got the best Brier score of the week, a very sharp .49.
So everything lined up on this one.
It was defined in the report as a clean, high-quality prediction. Everything aligned. The actual scoreline appeared in the top Monte Carlo outcomes, so the simulated reality strongly supported the result. And the post-game XG dominance confirmed the directional read was correct.
This is what it looks like when V8.16 fires on all cylinders.
Exactly. Low Brier score, correct direction.
So if the insight was so spot on, where did the auditors find the flaw? Why is it only near perfect and not perfect?
The diagnosis of the flaw is subtle, but it's vital for maximizing that long-term edge. The problem was underconfidence.
Underconfidence.
The report explicitly states that the model spread too much probability into the draw.
So even though Juventus won, the model assigned, let's say, 18% probability to the draw outcome, when the true likelihood, based on its own deeper diagnostics, was probably closer to 8%.
That's exactly right.
And that 10% of unnecessary hedging, that's what lowered the model's conviction in the home win. It just nudged its Brier score up from maybe a 0.45 to a 0.49.
That's it. This unnecessary hedging, trying to insure itself against a very rare outcome, is defined precisely as a calibration issue. The football insight was perfect. It knew Juventus was the right winner.
But that slight lack of conviction, that unnecessary caution.
It erodes the long-term profitability and the edge. The fix here isn't about football knowledge. It's about demanding commitment from the probability assignment layer of the model.
Okay, now let's move from unnecessary caution to the catastrophic miss. Case B, Leeds United versus Crystal Palace.
Oh, this is the big one.
Leeds won 4-1. The model called an away lean for Crystal Palace and clocked the worst Brier score of the week, 0.78, a total failure.
And the report is really clear on this. This was not just simple variance or bad luck. This failure was directly tied to structural issues and a critical contextual blind spot.
Meaning the error was actually built into the model's assumption.
Assumptions about how human motivation translates into statistical performance, yes.
So what were the specific systematic errors that caused this huge miss?
There were 3 major intersecting problems. First, the model overweighted the simple ELO rating, which is just a historical measure of team strength.
Right.
Second, and this is the core failure, it drastically underestimated relegation-zone urgency. And third, it failed to properly account for Palace's injury clustering.
Let's focus on that second point, failing to quantify human motivation. That is fascinating. The AI saw a statistically weak team, Leeds, playing in the relegation zone, and it used these cold metrics to judge them.
Right.
It missed the idea that an extreme survival imperative can just drastically change how a team performs.
It missed the nonlinear urgency factor. The AI had this linear view of performance. It saw historically weak Leeds versus a mid-table Crystal Palace, and it favored Palace based on the ELO average.
It failed to integrate that contextual modifier.
That desperation, fighting for multi-million-dollar survival can fuel a 4-1 route that just defies simple historical averages. It confused a correlation, a weak team with causation, poor performance.
And the injury clustering detail you mentioned, that's crucial too, isn't it? It's not just about the statistical impact of one player being out.
No, it's about system resilience. When injuries cluster, especially in defense or midfield, the whole structure can break down. You lose tactical depth, cohesion, the ability to execute backup plans.
And the AI didn't see that.
The report suggests the AI treated injuries additively, like player A out equals -5 points.
Instead of exponentially.
Exactly. Instead of seeing player A, B, and C out, all in the same zone as -20 points. This specific combination, missing the urgency and underestimating the exponential injury impact, directly informed the V8.17 upgrade plan.
It showed the system was too reliant on raw static metrics like ELO.
And not sensitive enough to dynamic, high-leverage contextual modifiers.
Okay, let's move to the prediction that was, I guess, technically correct, but still fundamentally problematic. Case D. The 2-2 draw between Newcastle and Chelsea.
Right. The model called a draw, but the Brier score was a very mediocre 0.65.
So directionally right, but still a problem.
This is what they called a technically correct but soft prediction. Directionally, it was right. The draw probability was among the highest. The correct scoreline showed up in the Monte Carlo simulations. It got the what right.
But the flaw diagnosis points back to the problem we saw in the Juventus match, only magnified. Calibration failure due to not enough conviction.
The probability mass was just too evenly spread out. This led to what's called inflated entropy.
Entropy, in this context, is just the measure of uncertainty, right, or randomness in the probability distribution.
That's it. So if the model predicted a draw at, say, 35%, but the home win and away win were at 32.5% each.
It technically called the draw, but the distribution of probability was almost flat. High entropy means high uncertainty.
So the system was essentially saying, I have a tiny fractional preference for a draw, but I'm really not sure, and I'm just going to cover my bases across all three outcomes.
The simplest way to put it.
And that inflated entropy pulls the Brier score up because it demonstrates a lack of resolution. It highlights that recurring theme from the report. SPECTRA AI is often directionally correct, but not confident enough when it should be.
So this soft success, it's a signal.
It signals the need for confidence discipline. It wasted probability on hedging that wasn't justified by the underlying data, and in doing so, it sacrificed the valuable edge that true conviction delivers.
Okay, finally, the other major failure. Case D Wolves versus Brentford. Brentford 1-2-0. The model had called a home lean for Wolves, and it resulted in another poor Brier of 0.78. If the Leeds Palace game was a contextual blind spot, what kind of failure was this?
This match exposed deep structural issues. It justified, and I'm quoting, multiple V8.17 changes. It was a systemic breakdown where two core flaws intersected: faulty generalization and component destabilization.
Okay, the first issue was this recurring overconfidence in bottom table home sides, a significant structural home bias.
Yeah, this is pattern 2, which we'll get to. Historically, home field advantage is real. We all know that. But the model was extrapolating that benefit way too far, especially for weaker teams.
He was assuming the home environment would just lift them significantly above their statistical mean, just based on location.
It created a faulty rule in its head. Bottom table team plus a home crowd equals an inflated win probability.
And the second error is where the AI architecture itself became the problem. The artificial neural network, the ANN component, was overpowering the ensemble with extreme probability.
This is the classic risk-reward trade-off of integrating deep learning. The system is an ensemble, a combination of different models. The ANN is the most complex part, and it's excellent at spotting subtle, nonlinear patterns that might escape other models.
But when it latches onto a bad signal,
It doesn't whisper. It shouts with terrifying conviction. It's like the system's most enthusiastic but also occasionally misguided internal voice.
so the ANN component acted as a destabilizer. It forced the whole ensemble to be structurally overconfident in a direction that turned out to be wrong, which is what drove that Brier score through the roof.
Exactly. That high conviction can deliver that ideal 0.49 Brier score we saw earlier, but if the signal it found is bad, it leads directly to the disastrous 0.78 score.
So why was it engineered to let the ANN run so unchecked?
It was a calculation of risk. The potential edge from the ANN was seen as worth the occasional volatility. This audit proved that calculation was wrong and that the ANN needed a safety valve.
And what was the key missed tactical detail that sealed the failure against Brentford, even if the underlying stats were close?
Brentford's counter-attacking efficiency was not captured well enough. The XG was near equal, which suggested a tight game. But XG doesn't fully capture tactical asymmetry. If one team, Brentford in this case, is vastly superior at converting quick transitions from defense to attack, the team that dominates possession, Wolves, can still lose decisively. The model missed that equal expected chances doesn't mean equal conversion quality in a highly asymmetric tactical matchup. So now we get to the synthesis. This is the learning part. Analyzing those 5 specific matches allowed the SPECTRA team to isolate individual mistakes and then generalize them into 3 clear, systematic patterns.
And this abstraction, this is the most valuable part of the whole audit, right? Because it moves you from fixing one game to fixing the entire model architecture.
Absolutely. And the report just hammers this point home. These are calibration and weighting problems. They are not core model failures. The underlying football logic is mostly sound.
It's the discipline in assigning probability or maybe the contextual awareness. That's what's missing.
Precisely.
So let's get into them. Pattern 1, excessive draw probability.
The first major pattern, and we saw this in both the Juventus success and the Newcastle soft success, is the model assigning way too much probability to a draw.
Draw hedging, I think they called it.
Yeah, and it's a classic failure mode for complex systems that are trying to minimize catastrophic loss. A draw is the perfect statistical hedge. The model sees uncertainty, and instead of committing to one side with 55% confidence, it splits the difference.
And it allocates that excess confidence into the draw outcome.
And the specific problem is that this happens especially in scenarios where the Monte Carlo simulation already favors a winner.
So if the deeper simulation suggests a 60% chance of a home win and only a 10% chance of a draw, the model might still assign 20% to the draw just to feel safer.
And that 10% misallocated probability is crucial. The implication for performance is that this excessive draw assignment deflates the confidence. It fatally hurts the Brier score, even on correct directional calls.
It ensures the model is never totally wrong.
But it prevents it from achieving the precision you need to generate significant long-term edge.
It's the AI equivalent of having a brilliant insight but refusing to place a high-stakes bet on it.
Yeah.
The model needs to learn that cautious hedging isn't discipline.
It's an opportunity cost. Exactly. They have to force the system to commit when the underlying evidence supports conviction. The goal is to align the surface probability with the deeper simulation reality.
Okay, on to pattern 2, the bottom table home bias.
The second pattern is this excessive and faulty generalization towards home teams in the relegation zone. We saw this clearly in the two big misses, Leeds versus Palace and Wolves versus Brentford.
This is where the model is really confusing human context. The AI developed this strong prior belief that survival pressure just automatically equates to a performance advantage.
It's a flawed generalization because it misunderstands the non-linear relationship between effort and competence. The model observed a correlation. Teams fighting relegation at home sometimes perform above average. High effort, crowd support, sure.
But it weighted this correlation so heavily that it became a deterministic rule.
Yes. It assumed that desperation inherently leads to success, and it ignored the structural limitations, the poor player quality, or the broken tactics of the team itself.
So in essence, the AI failed to recognize that a highly motivated team can still be tactically outclassed. And that desperation might actually lead to more mistakes if the underlying structure is weak.
Absolutely. The implication for context is that the model needs to learn that survival pressure is a multiplier that you apply to existing skill. It's not a replacement for it.
Right.
If a bottom table team is fundamentally fragile, survival pressure might just lead to more chaotic, easily exploitable errors, which only accelerates the loss. The model lacked a mechanism to check a team's inherent fragility against its motivational multiplier.
Okay, and the third pattern relates to the internal architecture. Pattern 3, ANN destabilization.
This is where the artificial neural network component occasionally introduces volatility and just overpowers the ensemble, like we saw in the Wolves-Brentford match.
It's like a textbook governance issue in modern complex modeling, right?
It is. The ANN is designed to find those emergent, nonlinear patterns that give them the edge. It's their secret weapon.
But the danger, as the audit confirmed, is that high confidence from the ANN does not reliably correlate with high correctness.
So the system ends up trusting the wrong signal sometimes, and with absolute certainty.
Right.
When the ANN is right, it's brilliant. It spots some obscure historical pattern, generates high conviction, and delivers that beautiful 0.49 Brier score. But when it latches onto a spurious detail, a specific stadium grass length correlating with home wins 6 years ago or something, it generates these extreme, unjustified probabilities that pull the entire system into the wilderness.
So the ensemble needs to regain control over its most powerful yet volatile component.
They have to introduce external constraints, a better consensus mechanism to modulate the ANN's influence. And this isn't just a sports problem. It's the core engineering challenge of governing deep learning components in any ensemble model, whether you're forecasting sports outcomes or stock prices.
So now we shift entirely from diagnosis to cure. And this is where the real value of the report lies, I think. The SPECTRA AI team outlines this highly disciplined two-stage approach.
Immediate surgical fixes in version 8.17, followed by a deeper structural shift in V8.18 that focuses on context intelligence.
And the fact that V8.17 is based directly on this small 5-match test set is key.
It's the definition of rapid iterative development. They are observing failure, diagnosing the pattern, writing surgical code fixes, and immediately redeploying.
So they're treating these 5 matches not as unlucky outcomes, but as the perfect, customized, high-leverage data set for calibration.
Exactly.
Okay, let's run through the V8.17 fixes. They're described as surgical fixes, not architectural rewrites. So tightening the screws in the existing architecture.
First up, they implemented conditional draw probability shrinkage. This is the direct response to pattern 1, that excessive draw hedging.
And what does that conditional logic actually look like in practice?
It imposes discipline based on internal consensus. So if the underlying Monte Carlo simulations or the XG analysis show a clear directional lean, for example, the home win probability consistently exceeds 50% across 70% of the simulations.
And why?
The system will now artificially compress the probability that's assigned to the draw outcome. If the model wants to hedge, it has to have a statistically strong reason for it, supported by the diagnostics.
It forces higher confidence in the favored result and, crucially, improves the Brier score when the prediction is correct.
Right. Next, ANN weight caps. This is the safety valve for pattern 3.
The neural network problem.
Yeah, this directly addresses the destabilizing effect of the ANN. When the ANN's confidence in a specific outcome exceeds a predefined high threshold, the report specifies 65%, its overall weighting within the final ensemble prediction is capped.
So it can no longer unilaterally hijack the consensus.
Exactly. High confidence now has to be backed by alignment across multiple distinct models within the ensemble. It ensures that extreme probabilities are a sign of overwhelming evidence, not just one volatile component running hot.
And addressing pattern 2, we have the relegation-zone home bias correction.
This is a pretty sophisticated adjustment to counter that flawed generalization. They're adjusting the weighting applied to static inputs like ELO when a relegation zone home team is playing.
And crucially, the fix involves introducing a secondary variable, right?
Yes, you could call it a structural fragility score to modulate that motivation multiplier. Survival pressure is only given its full advantage if the team's defensive structure and recent tactical execution are statistically robust enough to support that motivation.
It ensures desperation alone isn't enough to guarantee a win in the model.
Correct. They also added a Monte Carlo alignment boost. This sounds like an internal reward system for consistency.
Yeah, it does.
It's an incentive structure. When the final directional prediction aligns perfectly with the top Monte Carlo outcomes and the XG dominance, the model now gets a confidence boost. It's essentially rewarding it for being right for the right reasons.
And that counteracts the unnecessary hedging we saw in the Juventus match.
And it reinforces internal consistency, leading to tighter Brier scores.
And finally, a specific fix derived directly from that Wolves versus Brentford tactical miss. Counterattacking away team recognition.
This is a major feature engineering addition. It requires introducing new features into the model that focus on specialized metrics.
Like what?
Things like turnovers in the attacking third that lead to immediate transition opportunities, defensive positioning during quick transitions, and the historical conversion rate of fast breaks.
So this allows the model to correctly identify tactically asymmetric threats.
Yes. Teams that thrive on relinquishing possession and hitting hard on the break, even if their overall possession and XG numbers look modest. They're modeling style, not just volume.
Okay, so that's V8.120. But now we have the future focus, the V8.18 preview, which is about moving beyond raw prediction.
Now, this shift outlined in the V8.18 preview is the most significant development. The V8.16 fixes were about making the current system more precise. The V8.18 plan is about fundamentally changing what the system models.
It shifts the focus entirely to context intelligence.
Integrating subjective, high variability human factors.
So they are moving from modeling static, quantifiable statistics to modeling psychology, institutional behavior, the external environment. They are trying to quantify the unquantifiable.
Precisely. The goal is to evolve the prediction from, Team A has 60% expected goals to the much richer. Team A has 60% expected goals but is playing under a referee who historically gives early red cards in front of a capacity crowd against a fierce rival, and they are desperate for European football.
That requires a whole new set of modules.
4 complex new modules that integrate these human factors.
Okay, the first is the referee and discipline volatility module. How on earth do you profile human error and tendency and feed that into a Bayesian prediction model?
This is pure human factors analysis applied to code. They introduce layers of human error and tendency analysis by tracking a specific referee's foul, yellow card, and red card tendencies across similar types of games.
For example, does this referee disproportionately call more fouls in the last 15 minutes?
Or does he show cards faster in high-stakes derby matches? This profile fundamentally changes the probability distribution of the game. Specifically, it increases the likelihood of an early red card, which is a massive external shock that alters draw and underdog outcomes.
That is groundbreaking. If you can model referee behavior, you're modeling institutional randomness.
And its measurable impact. The model now has to account for the variables making the rules and enforcing the game. This is a huge leap from static player stats.
Okay, next up is the Dynamic Motivation Index. This is the formal fix for that relegation-zone urgency blind spot from the Leeds failure, but it goes much further.
It is the attempt to formally quantify team psychology and objectives. They're integrating measurable factors that signal a team's motivational state.
Well,
Relegation survival pressure, which gets a high positive multiplier. The high-stakes push for European qualification, that gets a moderate positive multiplier. And the often overlooked mid-table nothing to play for dampening effect.
subtle negative multiplier.
Right. If a team is safe from relegation and too far from Europe, their motivation level often dips below their statistical mean, leading to suppressed performance. That dampening needs to be formally incorporated into the prediction, adjusting the team's effective statistical strength in real time.
So they are operationalizing motivation by tying it to objective league position context.
Exactly. It recognizes that a team's current statistical average is not its true performance capability if their motivation is at 0 or at 100.
The third major module is the home crowd intensity proxy. How do you model something as loud and subjective as crowd impact objectively?
Well, they can't model the subjective feeling, so they model the objective factors that act as proxies for intensity. The report suggests using 3 key proxies.
Okay.
First, stadium capacity utilization. A game that's 98% full feels different than one that's 60% full. Second, a rivalry coefficient, which quantifies the historical animosity of the mashup, assigning a measurable psychological weight to derby games.
And the third?
Late-game pressure amplification. How the crowd affects team performance and, crucially, referee decisions in the last 15 minutes.
That pressure amplification must be enormous. A roaring crowd in the 80th minute can cause a defender to make a poor tackle or sway a 50-50 refereeing decision.
It's the external forces exerting a measurable, if complex, influence. By proxying intensity, they hope to isolate the crowd's effect as a measurable contextual multiplier on team performance.
And finally, a much more complex way to deal with pattern 1. The Bayesian draw prior refinement.
Right. Instead of just conditionally shrinking the draw probability like they did in V8.1, they're now anchoring it to real-time game state factors using Bayesian methods. This includes tactical symmetry detection.
Meaning, if both teams play similar formations and styles that neutralize each other.
It increases the prior belief in a stalemate. It also uses possession and XG parity signals dynamically. The draw probability will be tied not to static rates, but to the actual state of the game. It forces the model to only predict a draw with high conviction when there's a genuine, statistically anchored tactical stalemate.
Okay, wait, I have to challenge this a little. By introducing the structural fragility score and the dynamic motivation index based on just 5 specific stress tests, aren't they running a massive risk of overfitting the model?
That is the central high-level engineering risk that they acknowledge. Absolutely.
They're fixing these 5 specific issues, but how do they prevent those surgical fixes from breaking 50 other, less obvious correlations?
That's the key question. The V8.17 fixes are explicitly surgical to minimize that risk. They're focusing only on reweighting existing components, not adding new architectural complexity.
But the V8.18 plan?
The V8.18 plan is architectural risk. The team has to validate these new modules against vast historical data sets before they deploy them, testing for robustness across different leagues and time periods. The report suggests rigorous cross-validation using data outside the original 5-match stress test.
So if the motivation index only helps predict Leeds versus Palace, it's a failure.
It's a failure. But if it improves draw resolution across 10,000 historical matches, it's an architectural success. The process itself demands rigorous auditing to distinguish genuine refinement from just overfitting to noise.
It sounds like they are consciously taking on high architectural risk now in exchange for a vastly higher potential edge later on.
Absolutely. They recognize they have maxed out the predictive potential of pure statistics. The next frontier of edge lies in quantifying and modeling the messy, intangible human element.
So what does this entire audit mean for you, the learner? We started this deep dive looking at failure, and the final summary provided by SPECTRA AI is a really powerful reframing of that experience.
The key takeaway is exactly what the report says. This was a valuable week, not a disappointing one. The model learned more right than wrong because the misses were explainable.
And the necessary fixes are clear and measurable.
Right. This rigorous audit process is the real work. Building a long-term, sustainable, predictive edge is achieved by meticulously reducing damage when the model is wrong.
At this level of transparency and self-correction, that's the mark of a truly mature system. It admits where its internal priors were flawed, where its own components destabilized the outcome, and where it failed to integrate critical contextual information.
It shows the humility required to build robust AI.
And of course, the report has to conclude with the necessary disclaimer.
Of course. These predictions are informational and experimental. Any associated activity carries inherent risk. You should always utilize this information responsibly. The core value here is in understanding the calibration process, not in assuming predictive certainty.
Agreed. But let's close on the system's own ethos. The final provocative statement from the audit. The model doesn't get defended, it gets tested.
That philosophy just encapsulates the entire report. And for us, looking outward, if complex AI systems can learn to model intangible, highly motivated human factors like relegation survival pressure, referee card tendencies, and home crowd intensity by devising objective proxies.
What does that suggest about the future of predictive analysis in fields far, far beyond sports? Think about economic forecasting or political risk assessment or even global supply chain optimization.
If AI can quantify the subjective psychological state of a team fighting relegation, imagine its ability to model the intangible political will of a regulatory body, or the emotional state and motivation of a consumer base that's facing scarcity.
We're seeing a shift.
The shift from relying purely on static statistics, historical sales figures, traditional polling, basic ELO ratings, to dynamically integrating this high-leverage context intelligence is happening right now, and is driven by the need to explain why the numbers failed 5 times last week.
We're witnessing the evolution of AI from a sophisticated calculator to a contextual observer, one that's learning to read between the lines of human intention and environment. And that, truly, is the deepest dive of all.